I was Muslim, my dad was an Imam. In the past couple of years, I'm just not convinced of the truthfulness of the religion and its claims that it makes. We seem to be told that, if you want something, you pray for it. If you want to be healed, you pray for it. We would expect to see certain things, like the people that are prayed for get healed more often than people that don't. But we just don't see that. So I don't want to go to hell. That would be the worst thing for me, to be in hell forever as, someone who's willingly denying. Like, it's completely against my interest. It would be like the worst thing that I could choose to do. So I was Muslim, my dad was an Imam, and, very much into Da'wah and all that. He read and wrote Arabic. I just, in the past couple of years, I'm just not convinced of the truthfulness of the religion and its claims that it makes.
Right. We're getting a lot of feedback, echo coming when I'm speaking.
Oh, okay. Let me mute up here.
So you may have another tab open and turn that off.
Let's see. I'm outside. Let me close YouTube. How about now?
Yeah, let's have a look. No, it's still giving me feedback and echo.
Let's see what else is open. Let me check my tabs. Okay. Any better?
Let me see. No, it's still. What we'll do, you ask the question. What I'll do is I'll mute you when I'm speaking, so that will hopefully prevent the echo from happening.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So basically, I'm not really convinced anymore, and I found that I've looked at a lot of different arguments. The cosmological arguments seem reasonably compelling. I've looked at some of the counter arguments to that. The divine hiddenness argument, I think, is especially compelling. And at the end of the day, all those common criticisms of Islam I've looked at, I don't think they are that important to argue, like Aisha's age and all that. Like, if Allah is true, it's by way of divine decree, it's okay. But long story short, like, the main issue I see is kind of the rationality of punishing people that have reasonable disbelief, and on the opposite, sort of rewarding people that have unreasonable belief. So I'll mute myself now.
Okay, so before we get into that topic, it's an interesting topic. Just tell me a little bit about yourself. I'm from your accent. I'm predicting or assuming that you're from the States. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you believe in a creator, or do you simply believe that there is nothing out there?
I think it's possible, but I don't believe. It doesn't seem like a creator. It's more of like a cosmic nihilism. I don't think, even if there is a creator, that he's involved with the affairs of us human beings. And I think that when I see what I observe in the world and in the universe, it seems much more consistent with cosmic nihilism.
So would you accept then that your view, if there was a creator, that he would be more involved in a way? When you say more involved, I'm presuming you're saying that suffering and these things wouldn't be happening. Would you say that your view, your subjective view, therefore, is that God, if there is a God, he doesn't involve himself simply because you see suffering and you see problems in the world? Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Among other things, I think the divine evil is a reasonable argument. Like, prayer doesn't seem to come true. Yeah, that's some of the reasons.
Okay. Would you accept that your view on the matter would be very limited because wisdom, or perfect wisdom, would mean that you would actually know the reasons behind everything in a maximally perfect way? And since we don't have the maximally perfect attribute of knowledge or being all knowing, that there will definitely be a huge limitation on our assessment of why these things are happening. Would you accept that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely a reasonable way of explaining. But the thing that I've seen is that it's not just that. It's many, many other things that have to kind of be... Go ahead. Okay. Sure, go ahead.
So now, knowing and understanding the fact that we have this limitation, to then create it, to then make it into a criteria for accepting or denying either the existence of God or whether God intervenes within our lives, you would have to, I would hope, accept that because of that limitation of knowledge, it's very likely that we could be right or wrong on this assumption.
Yeah, we could be right or wrong. It's in fact not only could be not only could we be right or wrong. It seems that what we observe is indistinguishable from there being a God or not.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make to you is that recognizing that we have these limitations, therefore we cannot use this criteria to judge whether God intervenes or he doesn't intervene, or whether he exists or he doesn't exist, because a criteria that's flawed or has many limitations cannot then arrive necessarily at certainty. Would you accept that?
Sure, but I think some of the line of that line of that argument is I don't agree with.
Well, what part of that do you not agree with?
I would have issue with that. We seem to be told that, you know, if you want something, you pray for it. You know, God, if you want to be healed, you pray for it. But we just don't. We would expect to see certain things, like maybe the people that are prayed for get healed more often than people that don't. But we just don't see that. So, yes, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But on the same token, absence of certain things where you would expect to see it is a problem. And then I guess it just ties into the divine hiddenness. Like, why would God want to be so hidden to not make himself approachable or realizable?
So Idris, I think we've moved the argument on. So the initial point was God intervening or not intervening, and that becoming an issue. And I think we've accepted that. Okay, that perhaps not a. Sorry, because we're getting a lot of feedback. So you've in essence you've agreed that that's not a criteria that can necessarily come up with or come to a conclusion of certainty of any sort. So we've moved on now to prayer. We've moved on to another topic now, which is that why is it that we do not see? Sorry, brother, I'm just going to mute you. Sorry, I will let you come in. When I let you come in, I'll unmute you. Sorry. So now the issue arises, which is basically prayer, and why is it that, you know, and I think there was a study done, for example, where somebody said, okay, we're going to get a group that's going to pray for a certain thing and a group that's not going to pray for a certain thing. And then we're going to assess which one has a better outcome to assess whether prayer works or it doesn't work. Now, I think it's an incredibly arrogant way for human beings to sort of assess God, thinking somehow that God does not know what they're doing and what they're trying to establish here through their own, analysis, as it were. It's almost like, you know, trying to play the Jedi mind trick on God, Now, the point I'm trying to make to you here, Idris, is that from our perspective, from a Muslim perspective, for example, because obviously we're Muslims, how are the different ways that a prayer is answered? Are you aware of that?
Yes, I'm aware.
So either you can get what you ask for, or Allah will replace it with something that is better. Okay? Or Allah may retain it for something that is better in the hereafter, because he knows giving you what you want may actually not be better for you in this world. Right? I think the point is, Idris, is how do we establish that claim that is being made is true or false. That's the important thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, you know, we can argue, well, I prayed for, you know, £1 million, but I never received £1 million. Therefore, God clearly didn't hear me. God can't exist, or God exists, but he doesn't interfere in human life, because I asked God and God didn't give me this. This would be a very shallow understanding of how prayer works, because in the Islamic perspective, that £1 million could actually be your downfall. And so Allah may replace it with something that is better. Now, the point is, as I said to you, how do we establish that that is actually true, and that we establish it with evidence? Where do we get the evidence from? We get it from the Quran and from the Sunnah. Now, if we establish that the Quran, through reason, through investigation, through contemplation, is indeed the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah then tells us that pray to me, this is basically beneficial to you, this is benefiting you, and these are the different ways that your prayers are being answered, it would then be reasonable to continue praying. Would you accept that?
Sure.
Yeah. Have you looked into the evidences of the Quran and why it is a miraculous book as is claimed?
Yeah, I've looked a lot into it, and I'm not convinced.
What was it that you were not convinced about?
All of the arguments did not lead me to all of them. I think I've heard pretty much everything. So I'm not convinced by any of them.
Which was one of the biggest arguments that you heard that you were not convinced about? I'd like to sort of analyze what it was.
So yes, I guess I'll bring up one, but I would just say, regardless of those things, I think there's, not to be dismissive, but I think there's still an issue of reasonable disbelief. But yeah, so in terms of the arguments of the Quran, I don't know if it's useful to nitpick, because like every sort of claim, you can go back and forth. You can always accommodate and come with different arguments. But at the end of the day, my honest, because I don't want to go to hell. I mean, that would be the worst thing for me, to be in hell forever as, you know, someone who's willingly denying. Like, it's completely against my interests. It would be like the worst thing that I could choose to do. So when I say that I'm not convinced, it's reasonable to just assume that either I don't have the mental capacity, or I don't have the knowledge come across yet, but I'm just not convinced.
You see, the reason that I'm asking you for specifics is because it's precisely when somebody comes up with a contention that, look, I heard this about the Quran, and these are the reasons why I was not convinced. That's, I think, a fair, a rational, a reasonable argument that somebody can come forward to, regardless of the merits of the argument. I'm just saying it's a reasonable way of approaching the subject. You see, the reason why I don't want to delve too deeply on, you know, the prayer aspect, or God interfering in human beings, or the universe, or not, because those arguments, I believe, are all subjective. Because ultimately, you know, what's reasonable to you, Idris, might not be reasonable to me, and vice versa. Okay, but ultimately, what matters is, did God actually say those things, and therefore should I believe them because I believe God said them? That's the important thing. So that's why I'm sort of pushing you a little bit on the question of what evidence was presented to you that you found unconvincing, and what were the reasons for that?
Okay, I would say that's a reasonable discussion. So I would say overall, the Quran to me seems more in line with the other stories that people have made up, and prophets trying to, you know, pass their books on as divine revelation. I think the fact that the Quran, for example, doesn't know that he talks about the semen and, you know, the creation of man, but doesn't understand that there is an egg, like a female egg, like it doesn't understand that the sun is a star. Okay, but I'm not going to claim the Quran doesn't understand that, but just such an obvious thing that it doesn't mention. But maybe the biggest one for me personally is that the special creation of Adam is, to me, easily defeatable from, molecular genetics. I would say for me, that's my personal position.
Okay, so look, fantastic. Now we've really moved the conversations on, and I'd like to give Dr. Imran a chance to come in there, because he's a doctor. He's certainly more scientific than I probably will ever be, and he's educated in this field, and I'm sure he can help you with this thing. So Idris, I value the honesty that you've come up with. I think you're being quite honest and sincere from what I can see, and I do value that. I think that we've also moved the conversation over from things that are perhaps more subjective to things that are perhaps a little bit more objective, right? So you've mentioned a few things there, and I'd like Dr. Imran, inshallah, to come in there, and we can hopefully progress with the conversation. Dr. Imran, please.
So the conversation has actually gone over a lot of ground, and I was right at the beginning still, because you made lots of claims within your discussion. And right in the beginning, you said, your dad was an imam, and he knew Arabic and all this, and he was doing da'wah. And then, which is, probably irrelevant to the topic. It doesn't give any credentials as to who your father may or may not have been. And then you say that for the last few years you've come away from this. But just looking at the things you're saying, tell me a little bit about that, because I'm trying to understand you. Because a lot of what I'm hearing is the same sort of things that I hear from other people who come from maybe an atheistic background. So, for example, the prayer, we don't see prayer being responded to. It's not a mechanism. That's basically the principle. You're dealing with another mind, so it's not a mechanism. So it's not subjective. It's not like a scientific experiment, because if I have gravity, there's a mechanism. If I throw the ball, it will land in a certain way according to a parabola. Why? Because it's a mechanism. It's not a mind. As soon as a mind is involved, then the results are no longer predictable. So it's even applying that doesn't make sense. You sort of listed a lot of things. And the main seems to be walking around, sort of juggling around the concept of the fact that when you look around the world, you see suffering. Or yes, yeah, there is. Is there? But that's not an argument against the Creator. It's not, the argument from suffering is an emotive argument, nothing to do with an argument against the Creator. Oh, he's dropped out. He's dropped out. So I want to cover some of this ground, because I think it's very important. And I don't know why Idris.
He's still backstage. Let me see if
that's another Idris. That's not the same Idris.
Oh, is it? Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, that's IDRISE. So this is another person. So this is very interesting. If he comes back, then please bring him back in, because I want to just break this down a little bit, because this is it's important to just the way that this was structured. So the first was an appeal to authority. My father was an imam and he was into da'wah. He knew Arabic. Tells me nothing about the person I'm speaking to. And then to launch into rationality. Actually, in an atheistic worldview, you can't explain rationality, because why do I say that? What happens is that let me just put the link, because someone is saying he needs the link, so let me just put the link up back into the chat before I continue.
Is that I think the link's there. There we go.
So I'm going to just post it again. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to an atheistic worldview, there's no explanation for rationality. We are evolved creatures. We have evolved through a bind process of selection of random genetic mutations. And what we end up with is he's come back into this thing. And what we end up with is, you may want to turn your camera off, it's up to you. What we end up with is a position where we've arrived to be the fittest creature to survive. Nothing to do with arriving at the ability to certain truth. So these are two different things. So evolution does not lead you to a certain truth, it leads you to survive. So bringing an evolutionary argument or that you're rational, no, if you believe in a deterministic universe, then what you have really is that your thoughts are the product of the chemical reactions or the subatomic particle reactions that are happening within your brain. And your thoughts are generated from those, and you have no control over them, just as you have the sodium has no control over the way it will react with a chloride or anything else. It's just purely a mechanism. So even your thoughts are not under your control. This is one of the corollaries. This is one of the consequences of believing in an atheistic worldview. And I mentioned the sort of emotive argument from suffering. So I didn't really see. I really wanted to just understand Idris a little bit more to find out what's going on really. Idris, tell me your background. I'm going to leave you before I ask you my question. So Idris, tell me. You said that your father was an imam and that you know, he was well versed. It doesn't tell me much about you. So what happened? Did you have any learning in the religion? Were you raised with your father? What happened?
Yeah, I was raised with my father. I guess I just put that as a background. I'm just familiar with, I guess, mainstream Sunni Islam. I'm just not like a new Muslim. So I'm just familiar with a lot of the arguments.
So when you were, because Brother Abbas went to quite some depth to explain about how prayer is understood to be that interaction with Allah when we're praying. Was that known to you, or you were unaware, or were you aware of that, or weren't aware of it?
Yeah, I was aware of that.
So the point I made about when you do experiments, you're essentially dealing with mechanisms, and what you're trying to do is test the mechanism. And now, when you're dealing with a mind, it's no longer a mechanism, and therefore your results are not predictable. So even the prayer test is not something that it's not something that can be used to measure this, because you're dealing with an individual as opposed to dealing with a mind. Let's just use the word mind, a consciousness, as opposed to dealing with a mechanism. Do you understand the distinction?
I don't know. I'm not really deep into philosophy, but I guess from my small limited knowledge in that area, I would just expect prayer to work. And when people say that, I guess Islamic narrative is that, you know, if the prayer is not accepted, then you get something better. It's not good for you. But that's exactly what I would say if I were a false prophet.
No, I'll tell you. So this is the thing. So it's interesting because you said that your understanding of the prayer is that if you pray, it's accepted. This is not actually the Muslim understanding of the prayer. That's the point that I was making. And actually, everyone, you know, I have young children, and they're aware of this, how prayer works, because we explain it to them. The other thing is that sorry, what's the point? The point that you made about that this is what you say if you're a false prophet. No, I'll tell you what you would do if you're a false prophet. What you would do is if there's an eclipse of the sun when your own child dies at that same time, what you would do is you would go out and then the people are coming and they're saying, oh look, this man, he said he's the prophet of God and his son died and the sky went dark. What you would then do if you're a prophet or you're a fake person making it up is you'd come out and say, see, this is evidence. That can't you see that I'm a prophet of God? My child died and the sky went dark. This happened in the life of the Prophet upon him, where his son died, Ibrahim, and may God be pleased with him. He died as a young child, and there was a solar eclipse at the same time. And then the Prophet, peace be upon him, heard the people saying the same thing. See, he's a prophet of God, and the sky went dark.
No, I'm familiar with that narrative.
I'm explaining to you because what you're doing is you're making a character attack. So let me explain. What did the Prophet, peace be upon him, do at that time? He went and he stood up on the pulpit and he called the people and he explained to them, the sun and the moons are the signs of God, and they do not rise or set for the death of any man. He clarified for them, although you are seeing this as an evidence of me being a prophet, it's not. It's a natural phenomena that has nothing to do with any human being. This is what I would expect from someone who is a truthful, sincere individual. So I don't accept your the thing that you're putting forward.
No, I'm telling you my personal belief.
I understand. But what I'm explaining is your personal belief.
No, I get it. But even that narrative, I don't.
Finish my sentence.
Okay.
What I'm explaining to you is that your personal belief doesn't concord with the recorded history of the Muslims. It doesn't accord with it. Now, so all of the history suggests, even from Orientalist scholars, historians, that they regard the Prophet peace be upon him as being a sincere individual. Some say he was sincerely mistaken. Some, whatever they say, they don't allege nefarious character or anything like this at all. They don't do that. So even when you're responding in this way, I'm surprised. It doesn't really fit. It doesn't fit with someone who has grown up with Islam, understanding of the life of the Prophet peace be upon him. But so what happened? When did you start to find that you were going away from this? Because you said you don't do philosophy, you don't really know much about philosophy, but you were mentioning all these philosophical arguments, and even divine hiddenness, and even you're talking about reasonable unbelief or unreasonable belief. You're mentioning all these sort of quite specific things, which are all philosophical. So what happened, Idris? When did you find that you were? Tell me a time when you were quite firm. Yes, I'm a Muslim. This is what I believe, and you were practicing. And then when did that switch happen? What was going on? If you don't mind.
Yeah, I think once I realized that I didn't have good reasons for my belief, and especially in grad school, I started learning more about critical thinking, and I just realized that I was making a lot of assumptions that were unjustified and unwarranted.
So give an example of one of the assumptions that you made that were unjustified, unwarranted, that sort of, so one of the early ones that led you on this path, what was it?
Well, like I was going to say before, though, I don't think those are, I mean, if you insist, I can go into that, but I think one of the biggest things, I just don't believe the Quran is from God. I don't, it seems more consistent with people like the other religions, people just kind of making things up. And I'd say, you know, one of the big things are just the Quran doesn't seem consistent with an all-knowing being, especially the fact that the special creation of Adam does not comport with modern molecular genetics.
Yeah, but this is a basic misunderstanding of science.
Okay, but it may be, but if it's my misunderstanding.
It's a basic misunderstanding of science to assume that any evidence. So if you're studying, so let me just try and walk you through this. Science is the basis of science is that there are no non-natural explanations. There are no.
Yeah, but one second, brother. My friend.
Let me lay the foundation for you. Because then I'm going to get you to do the science in a moment. So if there are no non-natural explanations and any evidence given to you, whatever the evidence might be, how are you going to interpret that?
See, I don't know, brother, but the thing is, what we see in our DNA, like endogenous retroviral DNA, you know, the chromosome 2 fusion, it's like God is trying to trick us to show that we had common ancestry with other apes, but he's telling us that we didn't. So it seems like a very deceitful God to put all these evidences in our DNA and then ask us to deny it.
So this is the problem, because your approach is very emotive. You're not dealing with the facts.
Oh, do you know about endogenous retroviral sequences?
Yes, I do.
Do you know how closely they align with chimpanzees and other?
Are you a geneticist?
Excuse me?
Are you a geneticist?
Yes.
You are a geneticist, yeah? Okay, let me ask you this question, and this is where the problem is. It's where your studies have taken you. You're now in the scientism realm, yeah. Now I want to ask you a question. There was a recent discovery of a recent change in the interpretation of some fossils. Are you aware of that? Related to plants and turtles? Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of. You said plants and turtles?
Yeah.
No.
Very interesting. So there were some fossils that were thought to belong to early plants. I can't remember when they were dated from. You know, millennia, hundreds of millions of years ago. And this was stuck in some categorization system, which is, you know, you would call it the evolutionary tree, just an arbitrary method of categorization. Yeah. And after careful study of this, they tried to look for the veins of the leaves, where the sort of the fluid would be carried. And what they noted was, actually, we're not seeing that. What we're seeing something more akin to the shell structure of turtles, particularly baby turtles. Now, what happened is that they've reassessed this and put it somewhere else, taken this piece of evidence and they've stuck it somewhere else in their arbitrary tree of life. So, and this is the point here is that the evidence, they did not challenge the theory. What they did is they just recategorized things. So the basis of evolutionary study, would be it genetics or fossil or even fossils, is what? What is the assumption?
There's a lot of assumptions, but there's
I'm going
common,
to give you two. Yeah?
yeah,
You
there's
tell me
common
first
ancestry.
assumption is the first assumption is that there are no non-natural explanations. Everything has to be explained naturally. A second assumption is homology, that similar things have similar origins. Do you disagree with those?
No, there's convergent evolution. Similar things can have different origins.
Yeah.
But as a layperson,
that's homoplasia. I'm talking about homoplasia. First, let's deal with the things that are the foundations of the evolution. The first thing is that there are no non-natural explanations. Every explanation has to be a natural one. That's the basic foundation of all science. Every single field, that's the basic assumption. You agree with that, or you disagree with that?
yeah, of course, because science doesn't deal with supernatural ghosts and all that. That doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. So therein lies the answer to your question. That's the answer to your question.
No, it doesn't, brother.
Let me explain it. The tool that you're using to measure a supernatural claim is one that can only measure natural claims, because the limit of that, the framework of that tool is within nature only. So every time you see a piece of evidence, the only thing you can do if you're using science is you can fit it into that. You can fit it into that framework that you have. Do you understand?
Kind of, but I feel like you're dancing around the enormous amount of evidence in endogenous retroviral sequence alignment between humans and apes. That's just an insanely strong amount of evidence. It's like looking at your grandmother's picture and someone saying that's a frog. Like it's almost absurd to deny that and just appeal to scientism.
So which experiment have you conducted? Tell me about it.
Well, there's so many. This is human endogenous retroviral sequences. So there's a certain class of retroviruses that can infect the germ cells, and they can leave sequences. And these, when they're in a germ cell, they'll be passed on to offspring. And we find that apes, especially chimpanzees, they align perfectly, where the chance that this could be random is astronomical. So to just deny that is almost absurd. And I understand, like, Muslims tend to assume God first and then basically.
Now you're being unfair. So the point here is that what I asked you was, what experiments have you conducted that to determine this for yourself?
It's sequence alignment, sir.
Which experiments have you conducted? Point to me to the paper that you've done.
I don't have the paper offhand, but you can Google Scholar endogenous retroviral sequence alignment.
Which one have you conducted?
Which experiment did I conduct directly?
Yeah. To check the sequences.
I have not peer reviewed that.
Have you conducted experiments?
Have I conducted other experiments?
No, have you conducted experiments to determine endogenous retroviral sequences and comparing them between humans and apes? Have you done that?
Published. Why are we going there?
Because I'm talking about. Because the point here is you're missing my point. I'm going to mute you because it's a big echo there. Yeah. So the point here is that if any data that's obtained about anything, even in this particular case, you can only fit it into your. Assalamu alaikum, Jordan. How are you doing? You okay?
Wa alaikum salam.
Lovely to see you, brother.
Good to see you.
Sorry, I'm just in the middle of saying something. So the only place that you can fit this information into your paradigm is going to be in your homology paradigm, because that's a basic paradigm within evolution. Now, there is no other place to put it. The conclusion. So one second. So the conclusion is, it's almost determined for you.
To confuse us.
Sorry? What did you say? I didn't hear you, Idris. Your sound dropped out. Idris, we can't hear you.
I don't know, my audio seemed to have left, but my question was, why would God leave this evidence in order to confuse people like me that I assume that I am a non-resistive non-believer.
So that's a very technical, philosophical term. I like that the fact that you used it, even though you're not familiar with philosophy. The point here, Brother Idris, is that it's the same thing. These are not confusing if you understand the difference between methodological naturalism and philosophical naturalism. Because you're not making this distinction, the assumption that you seem to be making, I mean, we need a further, deeper conversation, but the assumption that you seem to be making is that whatever science tells you is true. This is scientism, and the only way to truth is through science. And you're disregarding the underlying foundational principles. These are already set mechanisms. So if I see this evidence in evolution, it has to fit into this particular place because there are no non-natural explanations, and we determine things by homology. So the brother's left again.
No, I think he's having issues with the internet.
I think what we should do is maybe ask him to come back when his mic is a bit better. We can discuss further. But the point here was the reason that I was asking about what experiments that he had done was simply because if you haven't done the experiments, you're essentially taking somebody else's word, and this is really a type of acceptance of testimony. Peer review testimony, however you want to frame it, it's basically a type of testimony that you're accepting. And this is why it's really important that when you're making these claims about science, then you need to understand the remit of science, the limitations of science, and the foundational assumptions of science. So I am a methodological naturalist, but not a philosophical naturalist. I utilize what works from the science, but I don't regard that as being something that informs my metaphysical worldview, my worldview of how everything is, because I understand that the evolution or the scientific paradigm, it cannot explain meaning, it can explain value, which is why the brother mentioned that he was a cosmological nihilist. Someone, there's no real meaning, there's no real value, there's nothing really matters. I mean, the life of your child, the life of your parent, whether or not you're alive or dead, nothing matters, because ultimately it's pointless. You're just a blip in a blink of an eye in the geological time frame of the Earth. You have no value, you have no meaning. And on the corollary is no human beings have any value or meaning, and therefore everything goes. And this is where it leads you to a nihilistic place, which is a terrible place to be, if I'm really honest with you. And it's if you're a nihilist, then why even bother talking to anyone else? Nothing. It doesn't matter if anyone believes anything.